Wait, are we still talking about the fucking Titans? I thought this podcast was finished. Stop shop for news, views, and overreactions to all things NFL. This week it's the AFC South, every year's most exciting and most dynamic preview of all. Will this year be any different? So hey, we got Connor here, we got Ronan.
Hello.
And we got Sean.
Hello.
How are we getting on, lads? How's all down in Cork? We'll start with Ronan, sure.
Yeah, not too bad. Saw you guys in Galway there last week, so that was good to catch up, relive the glory days. Other than that, it's been pretty quiet. It's very humid down here in Cork, so not the most enjoyable time at the moment.
Been awful up here, humid for the last little while, but it kind of broke today a little bit, so we're not dying as much. How about yourself, Sean? How's all down there?
Same level of humidity as Ronan is suffering from. Me and my wife Sarah, we spent the next few days in Galway just kind of reliving the college experience, doing all the haunts. We went to Charlie Burns, and we went to Sparch, and we went to Charcoal Grill even. Just a trip out to Spittle and Salt Hill and stuff. So. And we got to experience the Galway weather, which I think we'd gotten very soft from 10 years of living in Cork. I was not prepared for how much it rains in Galway.
You'd think after the years you spent there it would be seared into the mind, but no. Yeah, no, similar. Lovely wedding, great fun. Then nothing too wild or crazy down here since. Had a fairly quiet weekend. We'll come on to our preview of the AFC South now in a second. We just got 2 or 3 little bits of news to pick up. So, crime and punishment, what are they doing? Probably felonies. Kicker Justin Tucker, who we talked about previously, was caught out for sexual impropriety / sexual assault involving massage therapists. I don't think there's been a conviction yet, so I suppose we're meant to say allegedly. He's currently without a team. He was released, as we spoke on the previous one, for football reasons. Now, he hadn't been quite as accurate last year as he had been previously, but I think there's just too much bad media around him at the moment that no one would touch him, so he's currently without a team. He has a 10-game suspension under the personal conduct policy at the moment, so can't play for the first 10 games anyway. It'll be intriguing to see coming to the end of that whether or not any team wants to take a flyer on him. I would say it's not worth the headache for a kicker on the decline.
Yeah, I think it really does underline just how little value kickers actually have in the NFL. That this guy, who is widely regarded as being the GOAT of kickers, I think he's the highest overall percentage of field goals made in NFL history kind of stuff.
Yeah, and he holds the record, or ties the record for the longest, doesn't he?
I mean, it's just kind of think, if this was a same level quarterback or a same level wide receiver, teams would still be sniffing around in a very big way, but because it's a kicker, it doesn't really matter if it's Justin Tucker or anyone else. He has burnt his bridges in such a way that I agree with you. I think it's unlikely someone's going to touch him. Good that he's so toxic that he will suffer from it going forward, but it is also interesting that it's only because he's a kicker that he's going to suffer this much.
Well, yeah, as I said, it's funny you mentioned the quarterback, given that this is similar, albeit not quite as large scale as the Deshaun Watson stuff. And I think we did previously discuss it. Maybe the Browns are the kind of place that would look at him. But yeah, just kind of good to see the NFL taking a stance. But also, I just think, yeah, probably the last we're going to hear from him. We had a couple of trades, which was kind of interesting enough this time of year. This one, very much on the face of it, feels like someone is playing Madden 2002 and just trying to get the machine to trade with them. Pittsburgh have traded safety Minkah Fitzpatrick and a 2027 6th round pick for defensive back Jalen Ramsey and tight end Jonnu Smith, and a 2027 7th round pick from Miami. I believe the 6th that's going to them can go up to a 5th depending on certain conditions. But yeah, it's an interesting move, isn't it? Because Pittsburgh, like, we're still trying to work out, and of course, thank you very much, Pittsburgh, for doing this the week after we record our preview for you. It's always great to have to go back and retrospectively add in changes like this, but like Minkah Fitzpatrick is kind of a top end safety, maybe getting a bit longer in the tooth now, but has all pros under his belt and so on. Jalen Ramsey, top tier defensive back who was top of his game, has fallen off a little bit, has a couple of all pros and so on. So it's an interesting swap around, particularly given that Fitzpatrick was previously with the Dolphins before being traded to Pittsburgh, which is hopefully you didn't get rid of those jerseys, guys. You can just wear them again now. That's pretty good, as long as he hasn't changed number, I suppose. But
and any old Ryan Fitzpatrick jersey, you can just
that's true. That's true.
It's like, oh, that was the same guy all the time.
Yeah. But yeah, so Jalen Ramsey, it's an interesting one because he looked a little bit cooked last year, a little bit out of it. Now he'll probably have his PR guys out saying that it was injury stuff. There is a lot of talk about, like, he has the type of skill set that could potentially be migrated to playing safety, which a number of players have done previously and has worked quite well at the tail end of a career for a cornerback, and has also not worked fantastically well. I remember there's a period where Terrell Reeves was being played at safety and it just wasn't really going to be working out at all. So it's an interesting kind of like for like trade. I'm not sure I fully understand it. The Jonnu Smith element, Jonnu Smith had a career year last year during the period where they just couldn't pass the ball down the field. He was safe hands, and we kind of joked on text about how Arthur Smith had Jonnu Smith previously when he was at Atlanta and liked to use him rather than Kyle Pitts. So Jonnu Smith will fit immediately into that system. So it'll be him and Pat Freiermuth. Make them both very difficult to decide from a fancy angle, but whatever. What do we make of this trade? Like, I feel it's like kind of a push to a certain extent. I think Pittsburgh get the slightly better end of it just because I can see the use of Jonnu Smith immediately. I think Ramsey is a step down from Fitzpatrick, but if Ramsey can play safety, then he might be a step up because Fitzpatrick definitely looked to have lost a bit of a step last year. I remember in particular, was it last year, the catch that the Bills had in fourth quarter, just directly over the top of him. He had his hands on the ball and the receiver just muscled it away from him. Um, but it doesn't help solve my query about what are Pittsburgh trying to do? Are they actually getting pieces to go on a run? Do they think they've got the personnel to do that? Because this is a weird trade if they're not in a this year scenario, right?
It suggests that they think they're on a run, that they think that they need to do something extra to get over the top from being a wild card type contender to someone who can actually compete with the Ravens within their own division, and then obviously with the Chiefs and Bills and teams like that in the wider conference. But when you look at the move, it's a bit lateral. I think when I first saw the trade, I thought, okay, Ramsey, big contract, they basically going to pay nearly all the money on his contract, that they'd get that for a fairly cheap deal, and instead they traded away Minkah Fitzpatrick, who, yeah, I think there's been reports that he isn't exactly happy there, or the coaching hasn't been happy with his performance over the last couple of years. He obviously came into the Steelers after his trade from Miami, which is ironically he's going back to now in another trade. In his early years, he was a playmaker. He was making interceptions. He was a difference maker in the back end, but in recent years, maybe he has not been there. And there's reports that maybe his presence in the locker room hasn't been as welcome, and he's not quite been the kind of general on the field that they thought they had earlier on in his career. So maybe just hasn't pushed on to be that kind of veteran leader from just being like a really great athlete, which he obviously was in his early career. And so yeah, you swap in for Jalen Ramsey, and yeah, I think Ramsey has leadership qualities in a certain sense. Certainly he fits the kind of classic cornerback, island type cornerback, but he's getting on, and there were definitely feel like chinks in the armor kind of appearing towards the last couple of years in Miami. Obviously he had a lot of injuries last year, but even his early tenure in Miami wasn't quite where he was at his peak. And so you did have just to be concerned then, do they have something specifically in mind in Terrell Austin's defense to maximize what they have in Jalen Ramsey? Because they've obviously made like a big move a couple of years ago by drafting Joey Porter. I think he's the future of that defensive backfield and has generally worked out quite well. And they also signed Darius Slay in the offseason already to be a veteran leader there. So I almost think this might end up with Joey Porter, who feels like a more flexible chess piece in that backfield, becoming like maybe the star position. There's certain defenses that have that idea, who becomes the kind of flexible chess piece, gets in people's minds, move them around, whereas Ramsey and Slay might end up oftentimes being the kind of classic boundary cornerbacks, and then the rest of the defense kind of works around that. And they kind of signed Juan Thornhill in the offseason, so he might fit in naturally where Minkah Fitzpatrick is, so that indicates that maybe they were already planning for this to some extent. But yeah, like I think it's hard to guess because these are both guys who aren't at their peak based on the last couple of years of performance. They're both, like, Minkah Fitzpatrick's 28, so he's not washed or anything like that, but he's getting up there. And Jalen Ramsey's now over 30, so, for cornerbacks, the cliff can come quite fast. So, yeah, it's a risky move from both, but yeah, Pittsburgh just feel like a team who are like, they felt like they needed to say something, and so they do the trade with DK Metcalf and they do the trade from Jalen Ramsey, but they're doing it at the same time as losing guys like George Pickens and Minkah Fitzpatrick. So I'm not quite sure it kind of fits together as to like an all-in type move, but rather like a kind of an attitude veteran change. And then the Jonnu Smith thing is just like Arthur Smith and Jonnu Smith, together forever. And he gets the pay rise that Miami weren't going to give him after a very successful end to the 2024 season. So, for basically scraps at the end. And yeah, Arthur Smith's happy at least. So whether that's a good thing or not for Steelers fan, having Arthur Smith happy is something to be determined.
Well, it's also, I suppose, if Arthur Smith can have a relationship with Aaron Rodgers where he can direct him, like Arthur Smith does draft up a pretty good tight end game. So, it could work, and Johnny Smith's proven to understand the system well. So, look, that at least is a positive. Baltimore have also signed defensive back Jair Alexander. The defensive back was released from Green Bay earlier in the offseason. They've got him quite cheap. It's a 1 year, $4 million deal, I think, all guaranteed. But
Yeah, mates rates apparently he's friends from Lamar Jackson from college, and
from
this
college
apparently
days.
strongly influenced alongside obviously possibility of winning a ring. Obviously Baltimore are one of the favourites in the AFC for that. And yeah, look, I think the third cornerback position for Baltimore that we discussed last week was relatively weak, where Chidobe Awuzie was probably the next man up who they signed in the offseason. Now you bring in Jair Alexander, and then you now have a really pretty good looking defensive backfield between him, Marlon Humphrey, and Nate Wiggins. And obviously just feels like a very Ravens move.
It's super.
A veteran, who seems to be falling off the boils, dealt with injuries. He'll come to Baltimore, be put in the right position, and he might get back up to his old Pro Bowl, All-Pro type
and
ways.
Look, he's got his 1 year deal, so it means if he performs, he can kind of get a bite at the apple afterwards. It's just funny to see like such a quick fall off, because it was only 2022 that he signed the monster 4 year, $81 million deal, and now it's 1 year, $4 million. But yeah, so he's going to look to turn it around. So look, I think it's good business, good value, bringing in someone with that pedigree, and he's still only like 27, 28, so like plenty of tread left on the tires. Just see if he can get on board with the Ravens' way of coaching, and yeah, more power to them. Well, on that cheery note, we will move over and start looking at the AFC South. So first up, Ronan, we have the Texans, 10-7 last year. They lost in the divisional round to Kansas City. What are they looking like this season?
Yeah, you have to ask Houston, do we have a problem? Like, this is a team which, in theory, shouldn't feel too bad about 2024. Like, they got into the playoffs. They won their division fairly easily. They won a playoff game against the Chargers, but then they go up against the Chiefs and they just look like in a different class. And I think the problem is that the Texans, coming into last season, the expectation was that they were about to bully their way onto the top table with the Bills, with the Chiefs, with the Ravens, these type of teams which have dominated the AFC for many, many years at this point. And instead, they just look like a fairly ragtag team during the season. They kind of have a defense that really pulled together, and I think what debacle Ryan's has done there is really coming together. But the offense, which had been so explosive, so exciting in 2023, suddenly turned into a dire sludge of an offense where CJ Stroud was getting sacked a lot. The offense just wasn't get going, especially during a period where Nico Collins was injured. That just seemed to throw the whole offense off. And you can't just build an offense around Nico Collins being great, though he is admittedly really great. And it just felt like a really weird season for them, even though, if you just look at the outcomes, it wasn't that bad a season. But that basically means they came into this offseason and they decided to make the big change. So Bobby Slowick, who last offseason was being talked about as potential head coach, out the door because in 2024, basically, he just didn't perform. And he just seemed to put a scheme around CJ Stroud that just wasn't able to keep him productive and wasn't able to work around the fact that these injuries were occurring, that the offensive line took a step back, and CJ Stroud just looked exposed out there. Now, I think some of the hate and some of the exposure comes on CJ Stroud for what he did in the offseason after his rookie season, where he was on a lot of podcasts, making a lot of comments, deciding to make himself a big personality within the NFL, which I have no problem with him doing. But when you do that, necessarily brings a lot of attention on yourself. And so they swap out the OC and they bring in Nick Caley, who had a background from New England towards the back end of the Belichick era as the tight ends coach. He was coach people like Gronk and people like that, and who was then the tight ends coach for the Rams, but then became their passing game coordinator last year. And so that's not a bad DNA to kind of be building off. He's a fairly young offense, like he's like in late 30s, early 40s, and so this is someone that they're hoping he'll bring the Rams magic and hopefully make something work. But what are they going to do about the biggest problem last year? Well, weird stuff, because basically the offensive line was an absolute disaster last year, but what they do is basically trade away Larry Tunsil, who had issues last year, a lot more flags than usual, but was still, according to the advanced metrics, a good left tackle. Trade him away, and then get rid of some of your like previous high draft picks like Kenyon Green, and some of the kind of veterans like Shaq Mason, and just basically take what looks like you could call a moneyball approach, where they didn't really get a big name to come in and kind of fix this offensive line. They bring in Cab Robinson, kind of the dictionary definition of like the average left tackle of the NFL right now, with Morgan Moses being like the prototypical right tackle these days. Ed Ingram was like traded from the Vikings, and he's been very middling to poor, to be honest, as an interior offensive lineman. They draft Ronto Irsay in the second round, I believe, of the of the NFL draft, and he's okay, like certainly not wrong with him, but he wasn't one of these high upside draft picks at the offensive line that was going to change things. They get Trent Brown, a veteran who's had a very up and down season, a very up and down career. Laken Tomlinson, who was in the Seahawks last year, very mediocre. Jake Andrews, and it just kind of goes, okay, we'll just take all these guys, get rid of them, including the big name Larry Tunsil, bring in a bunch of these guys who are much cheaper, and hope that between those and the young guys who've kind of got playing time, not really because we wanted to, but because of all of the injuries last year, we hope we pull something together here that's a feasible offensive line, and hope that an improved scheme from Nick Caley that can actually be adaptable and change and kind of play to the strengths of what we have, rather than Slowick, who just felt like 2023 worked, let's just run that back again, and was very much criticised by anonymous reports from both the older coaches and from players that he just wasn't adjusting, that he was making, that he even in games where he had a plan, and by the time you get to the second half, he was getting found out by the best defensive coordinators in the league, and just kind of hope that will work. And then they obviously have a huge other issue that they get rid of Stephon Diggs. That experiment didn't really work, but Tank Dell, we know, suffered that horrible injury late last year, which means he's not going to play this year, and we really hope Tank Dell comes back and is a factor in the NFL going forward, but we can't put any hope into that, and basically decide, okay, let's get young playmakers into this offense via the draft. So they draft Jaden Higgins, they draft Jalen Noel, and they add in some extra depth in Justin Watson and Braxton Berrios. But like those two rookies, Higgins especially is getting some hype in the kind of OTA minicamp era, that to hopefully add a complement that can stay on the field consistently and become the Robin to Nico Collins, to be that second factor, and just make sure that CJ Stroud isn't just locked into doing that one thing. And then obviously hope that the run game, which was mostly good with Joe Mixon, can continue to be effective. They bring in Nick Chubb, which is a very low risk, high reward type situation. We obviously hope Nick Chubb can return to being the player he was, but even if not, we know that Joe Mixon can carry the load here, and it will probably be very good in fantasy again, I'm sure. And just that kind of situation there in the offense now, basically new weapons, very young weapons, new offensive line, and then hoping this new OC can pull this whole thing together and hopefully get CJ Stroud back on track. Because I think we saw enough in year one to know that CJ Stroud is an incredibly talented quarterback. He's got a great arm. He's got a great understanding of the game, but he just needs to get back in it. And basically, hopefully this offseason, you'll see him put his head down and realize that, you never make it in the NFL. You got to keep working. You got to keep grinding if you want to stay at the top of the game. And if you want to truly compete, not just with the rest of this division, which, we're not going to spend be as too enthusiastic about, let's be honest, further on. If you want to compete with the AFC elite, if you want to be with the Pat Mahomes and the Lamar Jacksons and the Justin and the Josh Allen's and the Burrows, etc., you need to put in the work, and hopefully with this new identity they can do that. And obviously Caley, coming from the Rams, he'll have experience of working with Matt Stafford, and I think Matt Stafford is a good template for what CJ Stroud could become in terms of being more of a pocket passer, not a guy who uses his legs much, but who understands the game, gets the things, and has the kind of extra arm talent to make things happen that other quarterbacks can't happen. And I think CJ Stroud does have wheels, so I wouldn't be surprised if early on, especially to get things under his feet, that they might use him as well. And then on the other side, the defense, there was a bit of change here. They made a trade for Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. They added some defensive line depth with Sheldon Rankins, linebacker depth with EJ Speed, and a few rookies added to there in the defensive backfield. But, the turnover there wasn't really that important. There was some depth pieces like Jeff Okudah, Devin White, Jerry Hughes, Eric Murray, who were let go. But really the defense, I'm fairly confident that, whatever other problems are going to come up this year, that I think we have seen enough now with D'Amico Ryans that he can turn a mediocre set of players into a good defense. And now that he's got 2 years to get his system in place and to find more and more players that fit his system and fit what he wants to do, that they will continue to be a good defense at the very least. But they have the potential to be a truly elite defense. They obviously have that pass rush duo of Will Anderson and Daniel Hunter. They have shored up their linebacker core with EJ Speed to help out Azeez Al-Shaair. They have a defensive backfield with Derek Stingley, who looks like he's developed after a rough start to his career into being one of the best cornerbacks in the league. Kamari Lassiter was a real great steal in the second round, and he's kind of a very physical cornerback. I think D'Amico Ryans just has that aura, right? Where basically he feels like a leader of men, and he's got that defense working as well. And it feels like the offense, if they found in Nick Caley someone who has that same aura, someone who can, elevate people, can get a little bit of that rah into them, whereas Slowick never felt like he had that. He just was a kind of clever guy who had a good scheme that eventually got found out. That this is a team that could have the potential to reach that top table. But just last year, And obviously, just given the history of this division, to be honest, they're getting a smell of this division off them as well. Like, it's hard to go fully all in that's definitely going to happen this year, but there is the potential for that turnaround to happen. But this offensive line strategy is high risk, high reward, and if the offensive line turns into a big issue and this, like, basically sluice of all these players, or they have like 10 offensive linemen, all of who could potentially start. I think Titus Howard's the only one I would confidently say will probably definitely start of them all. That's a high risk strategy, but if that does pay off, or the offensive coordinator can work around it, then this is a team I could definitely see potentially return to being at least feeling like they can contend and make life difficult for those for the top table of the AFC. Whether they're quite ready to jump onto that table and make a real mess and get to the Super Bowl, I'm not quite there yet, but I think they still have that potential, despite the disappointment of last year, that they can build on and be where we thought they would be after 2023.
Yeah, when I think about this Texans team, I always do it in the context of this is a weak ass division, right? They don't really. It's the Tampa Bay Bucks comparison, right? They don't really have to be an amazing team to win this division, and so I don't expect that they. I think they'll be comfortable enough in winning this division. I think with Stroud, and if they iron out all the things that weren't working so well last year, I think they can pull it together offensively. And as you said, they have the defensive talent to be competitive at a high level. I think they're going to get the 9-10 wins that they need. They may not even need 9 wins to win this division, but something in that region. The question, as Ronan rightly pointed out, is what happens after that? Do they have that ability to make that step up? And I don't think the additions on the offensive side, the O-line questions, but also, it's not necessarily a huge amount of talent being added around your stars like Stroud and Collins, etc. I don't think they have enough in that to really knock them up to the next level that they need to be. I think they needed, if they were to make that next step, I think they needed to stop thinking about the division and maybe make some big moves on the wide receiver side to kind of give the firepower that they might need to get over the line there. But as a result, it maybe doesn't feel that that's what they're doing. Maybe this is just seen as, we have a baseline. We can win. We know we can win 10 games, or we can get close about. We know we'll probably win our division, get a home playoff game. Now let's see how we can slowly build something better. And it feels that this offseason was more about, let's get the foundation firmly into place. Let's maybe save some money on the O-line. So that we can then pivot in future years to maybe finding out exactly what Stroud needs around him to get back to business. Like, let's make sure this new OC, works in such a way that then we can maybe start to justify the investments in the long run. Because it feels in an odd way like this is a transitional year for the Texans, but not in the same way that's a transitional year for the Jets or something where they're coming from a low base. This is a team that is hoping maybe in 2 or 3 years to be really competitive. And I still believe Stroud, when he can evolve in that player. We saw in his rookie year what this kid is capable of when he's in the mood. And if he, gets in the right system, gets in the right headspace, does the right work, gets the right pieces around him, and maybe has someone like, the Collins around him for the entire season, or gets back Tank Dell in the long run. Once they has the pieces around him, I think this is a team that could, in 3 or 4 years, be a Super Bowl team. But I get the sense from this season what they're doing is they're not building towards that yet. They're building towards solidifying the division, recognizing that the Jags are on the way down, recognizing the Titans have a long way to come to get back up, recognize the Colts are always a bit of a hot mess. So this division is theirs to secure in the long term, and then you could maybe talk in 2 or 3 years about taking that next step up. And that's what this kind of feels like being. It feels like this is a solid, we can rely on our soft enough schedule to win 10 games. We have the talent on the players' side and the talent on the coaching side to make that happen. And then we can maybe see where the next step is in the next offseason. Now, I know the NFL isn't that kind of league where you're not really supposed to be thinking that long term, and everything is supposed to be how do we make things succeed this year, especially for a team like the Texans who are going to be in playoff contention. But I get the sense they're not trying to win the Super Bowl this year, and I don't think they expect to, but I think maybe they will look back in 2 or 3 years and say, this is the year we start to build the team that would make the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I have a slightly different take on this. I think this is a defensive-minded head coach sleepwalking to getting fired. I think the defensive side of the ball is looking okay. I think they're adding quality pieces there. I think he just is taking the eye off the offense and doesn't know what he's doing at all on that. Like you said, this is 10, 12 bodies trying to figure out what a line is going to be. and the line was already bad enough to start. I believe in CJ Stroud. I think we saw in the first year what he can do. I think he's definitely capable of that. I don't think he had the best supporting cast around for it, but like this isn't fixing any of the problems that they had last year. The line is going to be probably worse than it was. The weapons are definitely worse than they were at the start of the season. Now, their hope is obviously that Higgins or Noel steps up, one of the rookies does it. But like Joe Mixon was surprisingly decent last year, and that's great. That is not a justification to have a year older Joe Mixon with his backup being coming off an injury, Nick Chubb. Like there is nothing that makes me think the offense is going to be in a better position than it was last year, unless Nick Cayley's come in and he has a plan and he knows stuff that we don't, and he's changing up the blocking schemes and all that kind of stuff. But like on paper, this is a defensive minded head coach who is going to see the offense continue to regress underneath him, and that's a problem. And he could have the best defense in the world, but that's a problem in the NFL right now if you want to keep your job. And like we know that he's the guy they wanted, and they talked about wanting to build stability and all that kind of stuff. And he's probably, like you say, Sean, looking at this as being maybe more of a 4 year project. But like, this is a team that is like chopped and cut bait from coaches after 1 year multiple times sequentially. Like, if these guys regress this year, and I don't think they're going to do great at all, I'll be honest, I'm the lowest down on them. Uh, I think there's going to be questions about whether or not they need to change the coaching. And it's just like there was free agents out there that were available. There were players available in trades that you could add in. Like even bad players you could just add in for camp bodies and make reclamation stories about or whatever. But like I just look at this team and I kind of it makes me think a little bit of in division Trevor Lawrence, where like we see promise now. I'm lower on Trevor than I am on CJ, but like we see promise and then we see the coaching and the putting of the pieces around and all that kind of stuff just kind of killing any chance for development. And I think this is going to be that again. I think Stroud has talent. I just don't think the approach the Texans have taken to building this team are in any way going to maximize it. I'm expecting a very disappointing season out of them, frankly. I have them winning 6 games, so not winning their division at all. Well, although I say at all, I don't have anyone scoring massively well in this division, but yeah.
Yeah, I have them 9-8, winning the division, going out in the wild card. But I do think they have more upside. And I do think it's unfair to say that D'Amico Ryans is sleepwalking his way in terms of the offense. He did make the choice to fire his offensive coordinator and replace him. Like, you can say he doesn't know what he's doing and that won't work out, but I think sleepwalking is a bit of a unfair claim when Bobby Slowick was a highly touted name only a year ago. So you can say he doesn't know what he's doing, but I wouldn't.
Look, if we put this in another context, if we saw a team who was meant to have a superstar offense and the offense shit the bed, like we would see that as a defensive move from a head coach to try and push blame off. Like when we talk about the defense of Cincinnati Bengals, that was why they got rid of their defensive coordinator, because that's where the shit falls and they can't fall on the head coach. Like I don't think this is a massively conscious I know what I'm doing. I think it's a oh shit, what button is eject on this thing?
I wouldn't call that sleepwalking. That's very much walking in the direction, whether it's off the cliff.
Pushing random buttons versus sleepwalking is a different metaphor. But
blindfolded maybe.
I am going to stick with the continuity. Another 10-win season, 4th seed, division win, goes out in the wild card. But as I said, look at this team in 2 or 3 years. Don't judge them on what happens this season.
Yeah, hopefully we look better then. Sean, you're up next. You got the Jags. They went a very disappointing 4-13 last year.
The Jags, they just can't get it right, can they? There's one of these teams that no matter what happens, they're always 2 steps away from absolute disaster. And I will say I did fall for it this year. I did think this time around, with Trevor Lawrence looking a little bit better every year, they brought in Doug Peterson, they were winning games. It was like, oh yes, this team might actually be turning into something in the long run. And then last season happened where they just kept losing games and losing games and losing games. And now they are once again back to square one. And a Jags fan, this must be the most frustrating thing ever, because it feels like the Jags spent half of their entire history back at square one. The big changes are a complete change on the coaching side. Out, Doug Pederson out as head coach, Press Taylor out as OC, Ryan Nielsen out as DC, replaced by Liam Coen, the Baker Mayfield whisperer, in as head coach. Grant Odisky as OC, but I don't really expect him to be a big influence on what happens. And then DC, Anthony Campanile. Big additions on the offensive line. The big question, the potential two-way player, wide receiver / cornerback Travis Hunter, the rookie. They also added De'Ami Brown, wide receiver, and on the offensive line, Patrick McCarry, Robert Hainsey, Wyatt Millam, a rookie, Chuma Edoga, and as a running back, Baishul Tootin, who's a rookie. On the defensive side, addition of Jordan Lewis, Caleb Ranshaw, rookie, Eric Murray, and on the defensive line, Emmanuel Ogba, Dennis Gardek, Dewan Smoot, and as a linebacker, Jalen McLeod, a rookie. So not a huge amount of changes on the players. It's mostly about the changing of the coaching personnel, and hopefully then the ideas of changing of the guard in terms of general outlook. Players they've lost of note, people like Christian Kirk is gone, Gabe Davis, Devin Duvernay, Evan Ingram is gone. They've lost a bunch of people from the offensive line. Backup QB Mac Jones is gone. On the defensive side, Ronald Darby, Andre Sisco, Jeremiah Ledbetter. So they're right back to where they started from. They still have Trevor Lawrence, who has shown flashes, and it is to be considered it is only flashes, and we're getting to, I think, year 5 now, and it's about time he showed something a little bit more than flashes. They brought a new head coach, potential two-way player, and the need to turn one of the worst defenses in the league last year into something vaguely competent. So let's start then with the Liam Coen, Trevor Lawrence thing. Can Coen bring Trevor Lawrence to the heights expected? Can he finally pull the magic out and make this guy who was the surefire, absolute certainty #1 pick, the guy's going to be a superstar, best prospect since Andrew Luck, and actually turn him into something worthy of all that hype? I say he's got a chance, right? I say we've got Coen. We've seen what he's been able to do with quarterbacks. I mean, Baker Mayfield is a bit example when he's be able to develop them positively, make them believe in themselves, get them into a system that they're comfortable with. If you build the offense around Lawrence's strengths, what they seem to be doing, and Coen, the idea is that there's been a lot of stuff that they've been retooling in the off season. Lawrence is showing apparently improvements in things like timing, footwork, and reads. Again, this is not the kind of things you should be working on in year 5, but nonetheless, it's important that someone does so. So I think Coen is the right guy maybe to at this stage of Lawrence's career to bring that first level, and maybe it's also the first recognition that the young spark is gone. He's not the young up and coming player who needs to be brought to the next level. He's the guy who's beginning to drift. He's the Baker Mayfield, right? He's the guy who's been around a few years and maybe hasn't quite found where he needs to be, and Liam Coen is the perfect guy in terms of that. The big questions with Lawrence will be health. I mean, we've talked on this podcast before about how basically Lawrence played non-stop through high school and college and early professional career, playing often when injured, and noticeably had decreases in quality of his play when injured, to the point where last year he finally missed some games. He missed 8 of the last 19 games. So keeping him healthy remains critical. Cohen's system apparently is aimed around protecting him better, and some of the offensive line additions kind of speak to that. They have, on the wide receiver, they still have people like Brian Thomas around. Travis Hunter will probably be more offensive than defensive, and I'll talk briefly about that in a second, but he's an interesting little shake things up as well. A little bit of weakness at running back. I mean, Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, these are decent players, but they're not necessarily someone you can maybe rely on all the time. So it's not a spectacular offense, but there does seem to be improvements on the head coaching side, improvements in the personnel around him. I mean, someone like Travis Hunter, for example, is always going to be a more exciting prospect than Christian Kirk. Christian Kirk has a very clear ceiling. With someone like Hunter, you don't really know what his ceiling is, and we're all about to find out. In terms of Hunter, I don't think he's going to be a two-way player. I mean, not in any meaningful sense, right? This isn't the 1980s, right? The complexity of mastering both a wide receiver playbook and a cornerback playbook it's impossible, right? The NFL has just become so much more of a complex league. I don't think true two-way players are possible anymore. I mean, even his teammates are coming out in the media and saying there's a brutal reality he has to face. Although the coaching and ownership seem to continue to be pushing him to play both ends. I'd say he might get the odd snap on defense, maybe 2 or 3 plays a game, and maybe that over time will fall away. I think he'll be primarily used as a wide receiver. He might have a kind of impactful usefulness if they're running some kind of interesting play on the defensive side in which he plays a major role. He might have a thing in there. Or if they're playing some sort of trick play on the offensive side, they might bring him in that way. I think that's as far as we're going to get from the two-way phenomenon. So I think he will be judged as a wide receiver ultimately, and it's going to be interesting to see how much he's able to stand on just being that one thing, rather than the kind of the hype of being the two-way train. Finally, then on the defensive side, Anthony Campanile, he comes from the Packers, who have always had a fairly decent defense recently. He apparently he's an interesting scheme guy. He's got a lot of ideas on the scheme side. A lot of zone is his thing, and apparently there's a lot of hype in the Jags back room about how he's fitting into the natural. There's some natural zone players, Jarian Jones or whatever that he's fitting this into. So the honest thing is it can't get much worse, right? This is a team that was, bottom 5 in defense in points last year, bottom 2 in yards. This is at least a system that is a little bit more oriented towards actually existing as a structure, actually fitting into what the players are capable of. He does have stars, I mean, Josh Hines Allen is just a beast and a machine. Trayvon Walker is a very talented player as well. Other linebacker people like Olu Coen and Lloyd can bring extra things to it. So with adding Hunter and cornerback, if he plays a lot, there's a lot of potential there. So it's about if the scheme works. He's obviously trying to change the scheme, but it seems to be changing the scheme in the turning towards what the players want as opposed to making them do something they don't want. So there's going to be the normal pitfalls that a DC has at the very start. The schematics might be too confusing, or he might not quite work out what players need versus what he wants to impose on the system. Player misfits, poor communication, these are all standard things. But I think there's a reason to be optimistic, mostly because they can't get much worse defensively, honestly. The Jags were so bad last year on the defensive side that any kind of improvement will be a big one. So that means this team is probably going to be better than last year. The offense will probably be slightly better than last year. How much better is really the question that Liam Coen's job will hang on. I would think the defense will be a good bit better than last year. Is that enough to win the division? I don't necessarily think so. I think we need to see Trevor Lawrence making a huge step up into genuine superstar strategy in order to pull the slightly weak offensive talent pool around him up to something, or we need to see Travis Hunter become this amazing star straight out the gate, which isn't necessarily something that you can bank on if he's intent on playing two ways and is trying to deal with two different playbooks. I think the defense will be solid. The offense is where this team lives or dies. I see them make an improvement from last year, but they're probably still not good enough to win this division. Would be my call.
Yeah, like I'd look at this team and I like what I'm seeing. Like I don't think they're going to be world beaters in year one. Full stop. But I think Liam Coen is a good fit for what they want to do. I think he's shown his ability to maximize quarterbacks and develop quarterbacks. So I think that's particularly useful. I also think there's pieces they need to develop to. Like we'll see what Travis Hunter is. We'll see who might be able to step in to make is this Tutton running back chap any good. But like I look at it and go, Trevor Lawrence, I'm lower on him than I think a lot of people are. I think people are coming around to the idea that maybe he's not going to reach the heights that they thought. He might just be that mid-tier quarterback. But you know what? We've seen this guy make mid-tier quarterbacks work, and what I think they have, which they probably maybe didn't previously, is Brian Thomas to me is a potential top end wide receiver in this league. Like I think if he continues what he was doing last year and continues to develop, he has an absolute like WR1 weapon there, and they can build on that. And if Hunter can help and pull some more coverage off him, great. But like I think the building blocks there for the offense to improve. I'm with you. I think the think the defensive side still has a lot of work to go on it. I don't really know much about Campanile at all, so I can't comment a huge amount on that. But they are still talent deficient down on that side of the ball largely. But again, if that ends up being where Travis Hunter plays more of his football, maybe that one improves a lot more on the back end as well. Who knows? But I'm just kind of, I think the Jags have kind of they've seen where their shortcomings are a bit, and they've said, okay, let's get in something specifically for that. Let's not go for the college guy because it's hot and new. Let's not go for the old stodgy man who did it 20 years ago. Like, let's get in someone who in recent times has helped develop a quarterback with question marks attached to them into a serviceable starter, and we'll just start to build talent around that and see what we can do. Because similar to what you said about the Texans' approach to this division, Sean, I think it's pretty obvious that, like, you don't need to be a 12-win team to be winning this division. You know, it's not that far gone. But yeah, like I like it. I don't expect it to be fireworks, but I think it'll be a step in the right direction anyway.
Yeah, like my hot take is probably that Trevor Lawrence is turning into like Beach Boy Jared Goff, basically. Which is ironic because Jared Goff's from California.
Surely Andy
Trevor Lawrence is
Dalton.
from Tennessee. No, I think he's better than Andy Dalton because I think he has those raw tools that if he's comfortable with what he sees on the field under a good OC, under a good head coach, that you'll see those things manifest. Which I think is what we've seen with Jared Goff, right? When Jared Goff is comfortable, when a scheme works, when the OC is a little bit ahead of the DCs in terms of the scheme, that he has that kind of extra oomph, that extra arm talent, that extra athleticism in the case of Lawrence as well, that he can make special things happen that an Andy Dalton isn't capable of doing. So I think it's a little bit different from Andy Dalton, in my opinion. And so I think the hope here for Lawrence is that Liam Coen, after obviously doing a good job coming in on a year one, like a pretty quick deal and trying like make sure that the Baker Mayfield situation continued to be positive after obviously they lost their OC in Tampa Bay last year again. That he will be hoping that he could do something similar for Trevor Lawrence. It doesn't need to be amazing because I said this guy is talented, but he always felt like a beat behind under Pedersen, and obviously we won't even talk about it there beforehand, but he always was just a little bit behind where he needed to be to make the throws happen. His mechanics were always a little bit sloppy, so if he can just clean up his mechanics a little bit and feel more comfortable in the scheme. And this is a guy who's obviously been exposed to so many different defensive schemes at this point in his short career. It's hard to know how quickly he'll be able to adapt. But if he can just get into a scheme that is quarterback friendly, that cares more half read fields, and which he knows what's going to happen before it happens, I think you'll see his, actual underlying talent manifest and turn into a good offense. Whether that's enough to turn this team into a genuine contender, both within the division and wider, I'm not quite sure. I'll have to see it to believe it. I think on the offense, like I said, as you both pointed out, Brian Thomas is a huge fill-up, and the offensive line is solid, so there's enough there, and then Travis Hunter to be seen. I think I always saw him more as a cornerback, but they seem intent on putting him there at wide receiver, and their GM James Gladstone seems to believe he's the next coming of Christ. But if that pick turns out right, then I'm sure like all my doubts will be washed away and I'll be made look like a fool. And on the defense, like, Anthony Campanile comes over from Green Bay, who have been kind of the masters of fine but not great defense. I would still hope, after many, many years of hoping, that this Jaguars defense, which has superstars like Josh Allen and obviously picked Trayvon Walker over Hayden Hutchinson a few years ago, and he's turned into a very good player, could turn into an actual good defense. But once again, I'll have to see it to believe it. So I think the Jaguars feel like a solid team, but I do feel like with a new head coach and with an opportunity to just have a scheme that makes Trevor Lawrence's job easier and just maybe kicks his mechanics a little bit into touch, that they could turn into more than that. But for now, I'm going to take a fairly conservative approach. I have them 7-10, 10th best team in the AFC, but I do think they have more upside than that.
I have them 7-10, but that has them getting the wildcard berth. I'm very high on the AFC. So
Wow.
they win
I
the
think that
division
would
with
be
7 wins.
that must be a record for what the lowest one would be.
Well,
I'm also 7-10, which would make them the 10th seed. I think they could maybe scrape up to 8 or 9 wins if things fall their way, and if the Texans do have a bad year, they might sneak into the division. But I think any improvement for Jags fans would be welcome at this point.
yeah, that seems fair. Next up, we have the Colts. This is me to chat about the Colts. They went 8-9 last year, and yeah, the struggle and strife seem to continue on for the Colts. So they've changed around a chunk of their offensive line. Ryan Kelly, Will Freeze, and Mark Lewinsky are all gone. Joe Flacco is no longer there as the backup, and they also lost tight end Kylan Grayson and running back Trey Sermon. They had a big turnover on the defense, the largest and probably most important being Gus Bradley is no longer there. They then lost Owen Dagbo, Brian Davis, all from the line. They lost linebacker EJ Speed and defensive backs Julian Blackman and Ronnie Harrison. So who have they
Oh,
brought in?
Connor,
Yeah.
if you need to tap out at any point, if you're tired, feel free to do so.
Yeah, no, I'm just gonna take a play off here. Just a little puffed. Yeah, the quarterback. Well, they decided that Joe Flacco was not elite dragon enough for them, so they brought in Daniel Jones, of course, the the logical successor. They also then brought in Riley Leonard, the rookie, on the defensive side. Lou Anarumo, ex of the Bengals, has come over to be their defensive coach. They've brought in a lot of defensive backs. So Travarius Ward is there, Cameron Bynum is there. They also brought in Corey Ballantine, rookie Justin Wally, and defensive lineman Neville Gallimore. And on the offensive side, the big choice in the first round was rookie tight end Tyler Warren. They've also added Khalil Herbert, running back DJ Giddens, who's a rookie, and Jalen Travis, a rookie offensive lineman. So the Colts are sitting in a bit of an awkward spot. This is some of this analysis is not massively different from last year's analysis, which is they spent a big first round pick on their quarterback, and they are still very unsure as to whether or not he is their quarterback. That is going to be a problem for them. Danny Dimes is brought in to compete with him, which is a choice, I suppose. He seems grand, like he's going to be a serviceable backup level, but like my prediction for how this is going to go is Anthony Richardson is going to probably start the season. He's going to have 2 games, maybe 3 games that go well, and then he's going to have an explosion game or two, and everyone's going to get mad, and they're going to call for Danny Dimes to be the starter, and they're going to put Danny Dimes in. Danny Dimes is going to look great for about a game, and then everyone's going to say, "Oh, fantastic, we've got it sorted," and then he will collapse, and then they'll just keep flipping over and back, and then eventually at the back end of the season, we'll see a little bit of Riley Leonard playing as well, because I don't think either of these two are the option. I do think Danny Dimes is probably better than we give him credit for. He could probably slot in here. There are some pieces on this offense that would work and possibly play to even strengths of his as well. Like what they've got in their favor on the offensive side is they've got a pretty decent line, or at least half of it is decent on the left hand side, and the center is not bad. The right hand side maybe a little bit to be desired. Jonathan Taylor is a good running back, although he does have injury concerns, so we might see the rookie DJ Giddens get in for a little bit as well. I don't hate their wide receiver core. I don't think they're phenomenal. I think they're getting a little longer in the tooth with Michael Pittman, and then you've got Josh Downs. Alec Pierce was a pretty solid performer last year for them as well. The big one obviously going to be this tight end. Will they have a first year success a la Brock Bowers out of this Tyler Warren, or will it be more kind of a was that the right call or not for them to make at that point? Because there was a lot of offensive options if that was the way they wanted to go on the board at that point. But Tyler Warren, like his scouting report looks pretty good. I think particularly when you have question marks around the accuracy and processing of the quarterbacks, you would then want someone who's going to be bigger, visible, coming over the middle, like basically someone to throw hospital balls to, and that might be what he's going to have to fit in that one. The defensive side, I think, is going to be more interesting because I think the biggest problem with it was Gus Bradley being the defensive coordinator. Now, look, it's not a wash with talent on here, right? But there are good pieces. DeForest Buckner is a good defensive lineman. Kwity Paye had a pretty decent season last year. Zaire Franklin's not bad there at linebacker. And I kind of like the defensive backs they've brought in. Like Kenny Moore and Travarius Ward are a fine 1-2 combo at cornerback. Hopefully Ward can bounce back. Obviously he had personal issues last year, so he wasn't going to be performing to his best, and hopefully change of environment and everything will work. But I think the big one is just that like Lou Anarumo is not a bad defensive coordinator. He did okay with very little in Cincinnati. We've seen him pull things out, be able to scheme up to get, a single pass rusher being able to do the business, which is why I think DeForest Buckner is probably in line to have a pretty decent season this year. And then if he can just, with the likes of Cam Ward and Charvarius Ward and Bynum in the back, like they should be able to put together a decent enough bit. It's just a question of, will the offense be able to keep the defense off the field for long enough? Will they be able to avoid mistakes? Will they be able to do a kind of a control game? Because like we talked about, half the offensive line is pretty good. They've got a pretty top end running back when healthy. So like, can that offensive line add a lean more into the run and maybe, split some carries to the rookie as well to keep legs fresh? Will they be able to kind of keep possession, keep the ball on their side, keep their defense off the field a bit, and get things going? And I know that that's the plan coming into it. I know that's what they want to do. I don't think they're going to necessarily be able to do that. I think at this stage in the NFL, if you are building game plans around hiding your quarterbacks, that is not a route to success, even in a division like this. Unless Daniel Jones comes in and grabs this with two hands, or Anthony Richardson has kind of figured it out over the offseason, I am not expecting a big turnaround from the Colts. I think this is going to be our defense is looking better than it did beforehand. The rookie is fitting in well. Our line's not bad. It's finally time to cut bait on the Anthony Richardson experiment and invest in picking another quarterback high up in the draft and see what happens.
I am pretty pessimistic too. The one thing I would disagree with you is I don't think they'll even give Anthony Richardson a shot. I think everything coming out of mini camps and stuff like that suggests that they're more than happy to pass over the keys to Daniel Jones ASAP. I think with Anthony Richardson, yes, the on-field play wasn't good. The injury concerns are a major concern, but I think the biggest thing is that I think he's lost the locker room, right? I think these antics of tagging himself out in the middle of a game is pretty unprecedented, especially for someone who obviously was a high first round pick. And I think I don't think Anthony Richardson could succeed in this team now, because I think there's too many people in that locker room who saw what he did last year, and I don't think they've seen enough from him, or he's shown enough in the off season that he understood what a fuck up he made. And I think like they brought people in during the off season, like kind of leaders from previous years with the Colts, to kind of like shore things up, but I never got the sense that the full team fully got behind him ever again. And I think with the injury history and the questionable play, that doesn't make it's not enticing enough anymore, after obviously all the hope and hype, shout out to Harry in Fantasy World, about him when he got drafted, that he was going to become the next, Josh Allen. It just hasn't happened. I think he's a guy who could go somewhere else and maybe turn his career around, but I don't think it's going to happen with the Colts. And, the Colts decided to give Daniel Jones a pretty decent contract, given the lack of good play he's given over the last 2 seasons, and they're just going to give it to him, because even though Daniel Jones is objectively like a less interesting quarterback prospect than Anthony Richardson, you know what you're going to get, and it's fairly safe, a fairly safe player, someone who's obviously got athleticism, even if he does fall on his face sometimes, even when he is running quite well, and will get the ball out okay-ish. But this offense just doesn't get me excited. Like, I think, with the right infrastructure around this offense, I could get excited. Like, there are a couple of really good offensive linemen there. They did lose a lot of good offensive linemen, so I'm not super pumped on like the situation of right guard and center, but they feel like they can survive that. And like, you have weapons, as you say, like Jonathan Taylor and Pittman, and Josh Downs is an exciting player, and Adonai Mitchell was a high draft pick last year who people are excited about, and they get this rookie Tyler Warren. But just like, we've seen it with the Giants, like they had exciting playmakers like Saquon Barkley, but if you got Daniel Jones as your quarterback, it's just never going to be super exciting. Even when they went in the first year under the coach to the playoffs, it's never because the offense turned into this like superstar club type thing. It's just like they maximize what Daniel Jones can do, which is kind of half field plays and kind of play action and stuff like that, and he's okay at that, but you're never going to get anything beyond like middle of the pack play at best. And the defense, there's holes there at linebacker and at defensive back, even though they've made some additions there. I think the defensive backfield will be better, and DeForest Buckner will continue to be productive, as you say. But, I think Lou Anarumo, his best defenses with Cincinnati were built on having a really smart, clever defensive backfield. I think they've done that there. But if you ask me, will you swap like a bunch of solid defensive backs for getting rid of half of your starting offensive line. Most teams are better with a good offensive line than with a good defensive backfield, so I wouldn't have made that swap personally. And so Lou Anarumo, we saw that when enough pieces are taken away, his scheme, which is quite complex, relatively speaking, fell apart in Cincinnati. And so I don't really feel he's been given that many new pieces in Indianapolis, and that many good places were already there that he's going to turn this into the best versions of his defenses, which were pretty good. They weren't amazing, but they were pretty good. So yeah, I think he'll be better than Gus Bradley, because Gus Bradley is the most predictable DC left out there by the time he retired. He was getting absolutely shredded by every OC in the league, so it'll be better than Gus Bradley, but that's an incredibly low bar. So for me, the Colts, this quarterback situation just stinks of, at best, studied mediocrity, and quite possibly even worse than that.
Yeah, I mean, I have maybe two pieces of analysis that I think about when I think about this Colts team. The first one is the Colts always tend to win more games than we think they will. I would be interested to see, in looking back on previous season previews we've done, and how often the Colts have finished ahead of where we predicted, because they always seem to, whether it's because the division is a little bit weaker than we give it credit for, or the Colts, they always have a solidity to them that means that they'll sneak out a few games or so. They'll always win a few more games than you think. And I mean, Jonathan Taylor is still, he is an elite running back when he's healthy, and in the mood. And he could, if the passing game isn't working, they could just build the entire thing around him and then have a solid season. But the other piece of analysis in my head is, it's Danny Dimes. I mean, come on. Is that the answer? That's not an answer to any question that anyone has asked in the NFL for a very long time. And if this team wants to have any kind of passing game whatsoever, they're going to need to find some magic beans somewhere to turn into. Because obviously Anthony Richardson is not the answer. And I can't imagine that Danny Dimes is a much of an improvement on that. The best you can hope for is the kind of 2022 Danny Dimes, where you stick him in a system where he just do just enough small things every once in a while, and you can kind of maybe make it work for a while, and you put him in the right frame of mind, and all that kind of, it can work. I just don't see it here. I just don't see offensively. They're going to be very one-trick pony with Taylor, I think. Offensively, and the passing game has to have something come about to kind of even allow the run game. Even having a play action aspect would open up the run game a bit. I don't even know if teams are going to fall for that, to be honest. And the defensive weaknesses that we've talked about are still there. So yeah, I can't see the upside with the Colts. I can see the downside. I just cannot see where the upside is.
Yeah, look, we'll all look silly whenever this works, right? The upside is either Anthony Richardson figures it out, or Daniel Jones resurrects his career, which are not things I'm gonna put my money on. So I've gone quite negative. I've got the Colts winning 4 games, which, you're right, is probably an underestimation, but yeah.
Yeah, 5-12 for me, worse than the AFC, but yeah, they could be average, but even if they're average, they'll barely be watchable.
And it's probably better for them to be bad, and then they get a bite of the apple at one of the top quarterbacks next year.
If only there was some quarterback with a certain surname.
Yeah, some kind of connection maybe to the Colts from beforehand, like a nephew or something.
I'm a little bit more upbeat because they're in the AFC South, so they will win games. So I've got them 6-11, which is 12th place in the AFC.
Okay, good. And rounding out the AFC South, we have the Titans running. They went 3-14 last year, and they've picked up the most under talked about first overall quarterback in the world.
Yeah, I was ready for this to be like the Malibu Stacy thing in The Simpsons. Don't be fooled. It's the same Tennessee Titans, but with a first round pick quarterback. It still embodies all the worst, awful football that they did before. But it's a lot more like the human fly from The Simpsons. Hello, number 1 quarterback over here, please. We're going to be good this year. And it's nah, you're the Titans. You're bad. You have basically what feels like the most mediocre coach in the league in Callahan. He's not even bad enough to really be noticeably bad. And his probably biggest strength is that his dad's a good offensive line coach, which could be the basis of creating the good version of the Titans we had at a certain point during the Vrabel era. But that was also bad. So basically every hope of the Titans franchise, of the Titans fan base, is basically if we draft Cam Ward, this quarterback of the future, number 1 overall, he's going to take what is a very mediocre roster and immediately turn us into excitement. And I'm not buying it. Sorry, spoilers. And it doesn't help that Cam Ward was probably pushed a little bit higher than he would have been in last year's draft, for example. I think most people would agree he would have been in the kind of JJ McCarthy tier of quarterback last year, not competing with the Caleb Williams and the Jaden Daniels. So there's a little bit of skepticism around that kind of built in. And then like the moves that they made to kind of prepare the way for the anointed one was they signed Dan Moore, basically a average left tackle from the Steelers. Many consider actually below average. And they say, like, that guy, that's what we need. Give him a bunch of money. He's our left tackle of the future. And you're kind of going, okay, this Callahan, the elder Callahan better be good at his job, because this guy has not shown to be like a left tackle, like a franchise left tackle caliber player before. They signed the veteran Kevin Zeitler. I think he will be pretty good, so that's nice. And they have invested a lot of draft capital in recent years to try and make the defensive line strength. J.C. Latham last year in the first round, Peter Skronsky a couple of years in the first round. They might have some issues at centre. Lloyd Cushenberry is probably the favourite right now, though I think he has injury issues. But Brendan James might come in there and do that. But, you know, it's very middling. And then, like, the Titans are like if there's a washed up but not really that big name receiver, you know they're going to end up on the Tennessee Titans. And like, I love Tyler Lockett, obviously a folk hero for Seattle fans, but he definitely looked like he'd taken a step back last year. And now Tyler Lockett signed to probably be either the second or third wide receiver here to pair with Calvin Ridley, who is good. And I don't like, it's really hard to evaluate because obviously the suspension and stuff like that. And he wasn't bad as a wide receiver one last year, but it was so streaky and unreliable that's hard to kind of go, okay, Calvin Ridley, another year in the system, with a better quarterback, he's suddenly going to explode out of the gates. He's probably good for fantasy, but is he good at like leading your offense? I'm not sure. And then they have this like weird Tony Pollard, Ty J Spears running back tandem, which is like good, but it's like, it's still kind of weirdly not great. It's just everything about this team on the offense just screams like it's fine. Like, I don't really have a problem with it. I don't think it will be a disaster like it was last year, but is it going to be turning into being great or good? No. And even though you have this first like overall quarterback, I'm getting the sense it's going to turn into elite. It could be, I think given how bad it was last year, anything will look good compared to that. But is this going to be Tennessee obviously has certain disadvantages getting national media attention anyway, or getting our attention, to be honest, as podcasters. I just don't see enough here to get me excited and go, okay, by the end of the season, we're going to be talking about the Titans a lot. I just don't see it happening. And so, their best chance is maybe, hopefully, that the rookie can hook up with the new rookie weapons that they picked, like Yamano or Chimere Dike, or maybe Gunnar Helm at tight end. But, it feels like it'll be week 17 and it'll be Calvin Ridley going for like 90 yards and Tyler Lockett for like 40 yards, and the running backs will combine for 90 yards, and they'll be losing, 21... they'll be losing like 14-7 or something, and it'll just be pretty boring. And on the defense, it's not hugely that much better. Like, I think, they have Denard Wilson, who came over from the Baltimore Ravens and did an okay job. Like, I think the defense was not the reason that they were terrible last year. It didn't help. It wasn't good, but it wasn't terrible. And they bring in a lot of meh names. Like Draymond Jones kind of played well for Denver, got a contract with Seattle, kind of turned out much there. And he's kind of this weird, like, kind of 3-4 defensive end, but teams are kind of trying to fit him in here, probably in Tennessee, as kind of a 4-3 defensive end, kind of an elephant end almost type of thing. Kind of weird. They draft defensive lineman up high, Oladejo. They bring in some kind of old veteran names like Carlos Watkins, Cody Barton, Lorenzo Carter, Xavier Woods. Like, these are all solid players, but they're the definition of not going to move the needle. They're just like, they prevent the needle going down, but they're not moving you any further up. If they're in terms of adding to your depth. And like, the problem is, like, they lose some players who were okay for them last year, but you don't really get that punched up at. Like Nick Westbrook-Akine, he had all those a weirdly huge amount of like long touchdowns last year, but it's not exactly like you feel like you've lost a huge amount by losing him, or guys like Tyler Boyd or Nick Vinette, or the offensive line, which they'll be glad to be rid of people like Nicholas Frere and Daniel Brunskill, to be frank. And on the defense, Harold Landry finally leaves after being mediocre for so long. Jerome Baker, Gibbons, Raekwon McMillan, Awuzie, Diggs, Worley, lots of like veteran names who never really did much for the Titans, which is just basically the Titans. It feels like the curse of the Titans to end up with all these guys who show up for one last paycheck, don't do much, then they leave for maybe one last riding a roster type. But this is the last time that they were considered to be starter level was with the Titans, and then they just showed that they weren't really starter level anymore. So if you're a Titans fan, you're really, like, I think going under the radar wouldn't be the worst thing anyway, because this isn't going to be great. It's just a mediocre roster, top to bottom, just not that much to get excited about. But your big hope is that Cam Ward can come in and offer functional offense, which obviously they didn't have under Will Levis last year, who's technically still on the roster, but can basically be ignored. I think the Kings of Cam Ward had, when we talked about it in our draft preview, good anticipation, decent athleticism, good upside in terms of his arm, but nothing elite in terms of his like physical profile. And I think that the anticipation aspect is the hope is that's the most pro ready skill set. If they can tap into that, and they have hopefully in an OC someone in Nick Holtz that can tap into that, but Callahan and co, I haven't seen enough to really get that excited about it. But if they can do that, then that's at least something you can build on, and could be like a poor man's Joe Burrow type situation in terms of like maximizing what talent there is there, and then hope that the offensive line strength of the elder Callahan can build a foundation that means that he's not getting hit every second play. And I think the offensive line, if it can be just a strength, that means they can run the ball solidly with their good running back tandem, and just let Ward just have a solid starting year, and then hope maybe next year is when they kind of start making the big moves in the draft and free agency in the trade market, that they can maybe get people outside of Tennessee mildly excited about the concept of this team. But this defense probably means like they're not going to be the most exciting team on the other side either, because the issue with the team, they have no pass rush. So even though the rest of the defense is okay, and they obviously have big names like Jerry Sneed, who they traded for the Flies, and even though they have good interior defense like Jeffrey Simmons and Devonta Sweat and Devonta Sweat was a great draft pick last year, but if you're relying on Arden Key and Draymond Jones or a rookie or Lorenzo Carter to be like your first pass rusher, you're probably talking a max of like 9 sacks or so for your top pass rusher. So it's very hard to build a great or even like a good defense if you don't have pass rush, and just it feels like a team that unless Jeffrey Simmons and Sweat just like ball out and just create complete chaos up the middle, which is possible but unlikely given that the lack of follow-up from the edge position, it just feels like to be middling. So this just feels like a very middling team which has made a big move, which probably gives Brian Callahan more rope as long as they don't completely implode this year. But I think it's at least one more year away from the kind of moves that could get us actually genuinely interested in the Tennessee Titans as a concept. For now, unfortunately, they're middling, they're fine. There is a scenario where they completely bottom out again, because, as I said, there's not that much to inspire you to say that they're going to reach heights. But for me, they very much track as just another mediocre team at the moment.
Yeah, I don't even have that much optimism about the Titans, to be honest. They were pretty terrible last year, and they really haven't added much. I mean, I think there's this natural tendency with teams that are this bad to be like, oh, rookie first round pick. They're bound to pick up a few more wins they picked up last year. The kid will have a few flashes. And I'm like, no, I just don't buy it at all, really. I don't buy that the pieces around Cam Ward are going to make him better. I don't necessarily buy that Cam Ward is worthy of being a number one pick, and I just don't think the overall team gives that much to inspire me. I found it quite funny, actually, when I was doing research for the Titans for this. The FanDuel has set their estimated win total for betting purposes, I think it's like 5.5, but all the local media are actually more pessimistic. Like, no, we're not even that good. So if you're in a scenario where even the locals are being like, we're actually quite terrible, you're in a bad way. Now, maybe that's just from living in Tennessee or something, but it doesn't feel as if this team has really there's anything really to be excited about. Now, maybe Cam Ward takes off week one, turns into, the next Peyton Manning or something.
Tennessee isn't that bad a place. It's like the Carrick and Shannon of the South,
Is that meant to be a sales pitch, Rowan?
Apparently, it's good for hen parties.
Really?
Plus the Titans. I think it's the Titans. They do the walk around for their schedule release, where they get like random people on the street to guess what the logo's team name actually means. That's a good one. Anyway, sorry I interrupted you. Continue.
Well, there's not much more to say. I think the rookie quarterback will at best have a middling rookie quarterback season. I mean, rookie quarterbacks in general aren't that good. Even the good ones generally don't have breakout seasons unless you're CJ Stroud or something. So I expect there'll be lots of interceptions, lots of mistakes, lots of really bad days. He might have the one or two days where he has a great game and the Titans fans are like, yes, this is the future, etc. But I think mostly there'll just be a lot of learning how to play in the NFL. And then the pieces around him aren't great. I mean, like, Westbrook-Ikine was not a great wide receiver, but he was a wide receiver on the up. Like, his numbers were increasing year to year. When you get rid of him and replace him with Tyler Lockett, someone whose numbers are very distinctly going down in the same direction. Like, Lockett is a good 4 years away from past his peak at this point, and the numbers are steadily going down in terms of yardage year on year. It doesn't feel like you've made an upgrade in any kind of noticeable way there. So it's just like, the team was this bad. How could they not find a way to make it better? Like, I just don't necessarily understand where the ambition was here, or what the Titans are attempting to do. At least it feels like teams like the Jags or teams like the Colts have vague plans about how we might get better if things work out. Now, they're usually, as we talked about in this podcast, quite bad plans that aren't going to actually work out because they're not founded in enough logic. But the Titans don't even seem to have that ambition. There's a vague, wavy plan that the rookie quarterback will make us better. But apart from that, I don't really see anything in the way of development. It's almost like they're trying to hang around for long enough that they can justify sacking Callahan and moving on to something else. Because it's just, there's nothing to be optimistic about this team at all. And I just can't see where the wins are coming from, quite frankly.
Yeah, I'd be quite similar. My take on this is the Tennessee Titans are a professional American football team based in Nashville, Tennessee. They compete in the National Football League as a member of the American Football Conference South Division. Yep, that's
That is all true.
that's all true. That's all I know, and that's all I need to know. This team is dead to me. It has been for a while, but normally in a negative way. A positive season for the Titans is me not having to talk about them because it's just boring. Like, nothing about this makes sense to me. Cam Ward is the most boring first overall pick in a long time. Hopefully he works out. I actually pulling for you Titans. I'd love, because we do end up having to talk about you at some point. I'd love for him to work out. But the stuff around him, as you say, Sean, like Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears is your running backs to support him. A bleh offensive line. Calvin Ridley and Tyler Lockett are your top two weapons on the outside, with Van Jefferson being your third option. Like, it's nothing. Like it's simply existing. That's all it is. There's no competitive spirit or edge here. There's no plan here. There's no anything. It's just, we are a football team. We have a 52-man roster and we will compete in the National Football League. And that's all there is. There's no vision at all. I have no interest in talking about the Titans. I hope Cam Ward works out and you just fire your coach and you get your shit together in future. I think the most boring outcome is 6-11. Like, not enough to be bad, just enough to be outside of my peripheral vision.
Sorry, Titans. Connor's left the building. But yeah, for me, 7-10, 12th mediocrity. But after last year, they might be willing to take that and hope that 2026 might have some more bright lights waiting for them.
And I give them 3 wins again, 16th seed. A second chance at number 1 pick. They might pick better this time around.
Wait, are we still talking about the fucking Titans? I thought this podcast was finished. Oh, right. Look, that'll wrap us up for the AFC South. Very good. We broke the magic last year. We're going to do 2 in a row. I won't ask about what your next weeks are looking like. We can do that at the next show instead. But yeah, look, for now, it's bye from myself. It's bye from Ronan.
Bye.
It's bye from Sean.
Bye.
This has been all 4 quarters. Thanks for listening. We'll chat to you next week.